Sport New Zealand has dropped its guidelines for including transgender and community sport following direction from the government. Community sport includes organised sports taking place through clubs, schools and events. It was first published in 2022. The guidelines encouraged sporting bodies to consider principles that they said were safety, privacy and inclusion. They were never mandatory and were under review at the request of the previous Minister, Chris Bishop. That review has now been concluded. Current Minister for Sport, Mark Mitchell, confirming the government will no longer be involved in publishing gender-related guidelines for sport. This move aligns with the Coalition's policy to ensure fair competition in publicly funded sport, with New Zealand First having pushed for exclusive biological female categories. Sport New Zealand says individual sporting codes will now decide their own policies and external groups can offer support if needed. Labour's criticised the removal as a step backwards, but Mitchell maintains the government's role is not to dictate how codes manage fairness and safety in their own sports. Ro Edge is the co-founder of Save Women's Sports Australasia and the International Consortium on Female Sport, and it's great to join her now. Good morning, Ro.
Good morning, Leah, and what a great morning it is, I must say.
Isn't it? Sun is shining, great news. I mean, you know, it's a good one. It's a good start. Ro, can we just go back a bit before we kind of jump in? When you first saw the Sport NZ guidelines back in 2022, what was your gut reaction in terms of how they might impact fairness and safety for biological females in community sport?
Well, we were actually part of the consulted group that developed them. So we went through that whole process with Sport New Zealand's contractors who did them. But we found very early on they were ignoring all the evidence related to fairness and safety in regards to females. They had a mindset of inclusion first, and that inclusion didn't take into account the impacts on the female category. It was all about the inclusion of males and how they identify, and really there was no thought. It was actually when the guidelines first came out in 22, like we'd seen the draft beforehand, and when the finalised guidelines came out, they're actually worse than we expected, and we were expecting bad. The worst thing about them was that not only did they remove those protections for females and they allowed male advantage into the category, but they gaslit and started conditioning females into putting men first, putting males first, and ignoring their feelings, their fairness and their safety and opportunities. And that was the most gut-wrenching part about them. Because if a female decided to raise concerns about fairness or safety or about males in their changing room, they would be accused of bullying and harassment and discrimination. And there would be a pathway they would have to go through, a bit like you, Leah, at your last job, right? It's so bloody frustrating. But the gaslighting on young girls and women to have to accept this unfairness was the worst part of that document.
Oh, I understand the gaslighting, that's for sure. And at the time too, Ro, you flagged a clear conflict with Section 49 of the Human Rights Act. In your view, was that overlooked? That was overlooked when the guidelines then were drawn up?
Oh, yeah, totally. And they had all these social scientists involved in their consultation who basically tried to say that gender identity was included in our Human Rights Act. Now, I know there's a big push for that to happen. There's a lot of money pushing for that to happen, right? But it hasn't. Our Human Rights Act is very, very specific in regards to protecting sex, where strength, size and stamina are relevant. And in sports, they are relevant.
Oh my gosh, yes. Do you think the guidelines ended up putting unfair pressure then on national sporting bodies, especially those that relied on government funding?
Yeah, definitely. I know Sport New Zealand said they wouldn't use the guidelines as a funding lever, but sports didn't trust that, right? And they were getting advice from their lawyers saying you should adopt them, otherwise you potentially risk your funding. So, yep, they did have a major impact on sports. And, recently we've seen there's a whole lot of sports reviewing their guidelines at the moment. And I'm sure that's because they've been waiting for this decision to come out, waiting to see what Sport New Zealand were going to do. And the best thing they could have done, because they couldn't fix the guidelines, there's no way that they said they were doing a review. And we heard from a number of people that had seen the review and were like an expert with the review, had given their feedback, and they said that they hadn't changed anything. Because when you have a document that's so ideologically driven, with inclusion being the mantra, you can't flip it round and change all the principles and all of a sudden make it about fairness and safety. It's just not possible. So the best option was for them to be dumped, which is what we asked for last month.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I went back and had a quick look, Ro, it's funny, they did acknowledge that mismatches in size and strengths can be an issue, but suggested things like age and weight categories could sort that out. I mean, in your view, how realistic fixes we're talking biological males and female sport?
Yeah, they tend to overlook that, right? They say that we're all shapes and sizes, but males on average are bigger, stronger and faster. And, we create categories for a very good reason. Like, for instance, in rugby, they developed an under 85 kg category so that smaller guys could compete fairly and safely. And it's a hard line, right? They weight test before every game. Similarly, you don't allow heavyweight boxers to box against lightweights. You don't allow, able-bodied athletes to compete against para-athletes and 65-year-olds to compete against 20-year-olds. We have these hard lines in sport to protect the fairness and safety of the category. And that has been blurred lately with an ideology that just denies biological reality.
Yeah, somehow everything you just mentioned, they've got rules and laws and sporting codes understand it. Yeah, when it came to biological men and female sport, all of that went out the window. Suddenly they didn't believe the scientific, the science behind it was no longer relevant. With other sports it is.
I know. It's like all this magical thinking, right? But there's a lot of people that invest a lot of time into ensuring categories are fair and are safe. So hopefully we're getting back to some sanity.
So let's go to fast forward, although we're still staying backwards. October last year, then Sports Minister Chris Bishop wanted a review. He asked for one. He said sporting codes were grappling with a tricky issue. That rethink, Ro, was in part to groups like yourself and pushback. Do you agree with that? And also a coalition agreement?
Yeah, totally. Like, we'd met with Minister Bishop in September and we'd gone through the guidelines with him, and he honestly thought that they protected fairness and safety. His officials from Sport New Zealand had told him that they protected fairness and safety, but we took him through the document and showed him the only time fairness was mentioned was in relation to transgender athletes. There was nothing in there. And so I think that was his wake-up call, that he had to act. And following that, he acknowledged that they didn't and then requested that review.
That's a bit of a concern, Ro, isn't it? That the minister, he's still obviously got a lot of portfolios, but, he didn't even really read or absorb.
No, but he's a busy minister and he relies.
They're busy.
True. Yeah, but his officials gave him incorrect information. So I do hope that they've been held to account for that.
Yeah. At the time, you'll remember Gender Minorities Aotearoa called Safe Women's Sport an anti-trans group. That's not a new accusation, is it? How do you respond to that?
I got asked this morning on radio if I hated trans people. It's like, for God's sake, I don't hate anyone. Honestly, we want everyone to participate in sport, but it needs to be in the category of your biological sex, because we don't play sport with our identities. We play them with our bodies.
Listen, on the platform, we're very open about, having a go at mainstream media because they use the narrative like that to skew. Well, you're on Radio New Zealand?
No, actually, I was on
Breakfast?
And Ryan Bridge was just asking it basically because he says this is what they all say. So to give me the opportunity. Okay. I know, but look, I'm expecting it today. So today I'm giving evidence. There's a case in the Human Rights Tribunal that the group of lesbian women called Lava are taking against Wellington Pride for denying them.
I've interviewed them. Yeah, I'm really following that case.
Yeah, so I'm giving evidence in about 45 minutes, I think, hopefully. Yes, and I know that I'm going to be asked this question, right? So it was actually quite good practice for Ryan asking me this morning.
Yeah, no, I'm, so I can't remember, I should know this. I interviewed one of the ladies in Lava. Yes,
yeah, Margaret,
and lovely. And just, I said, look, we'll follow. The case will be about a month. She said it would be about a month long, I think?
Yeah. Unfortunately, none of it is able to be seen by the public, though, which is really frustrating. So you can't watch what's going on at all. But, let's hope it's positive.
Let's hope. Well, your expertise that you'll add to it, Ro, later this morning.
Well, the timing of this announcement by Sport New Zealand couldn't have been more perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Now I know you mentioned that you met with Chris Bishop at the time. Was it early? Oh, earlier this month. Did you? Is that me or you?
No, that was
Beeping.
me. Sorry. Let me close
Early.
that. I thought the app was closed.
That's right. Earlier this month, did you put out an open letter? Was that right, to Minister Mitchell?
Yes,
Um,
last. Yeah.
yeah. What was the key message in that to him?
We were calling for the guidelines to be dumped because they
Yeah.
were so ideologically driven, and we had heard basically that the update was just not satisfactory at all. And
Mm.
we were meant to be a stakeholder consulted with during that update, but somehow we were bypassed as well. So yeah, I don't think they wanted to consult with anyone that gave them the message they didn't want to hear. And it's a bit
Yeah.
like when they developed them, they already had concluded what they were developing before they went through their so-called consultation. It was
Mm.
just a farce. So yeah.
So the guidelines were never mandatory though, Ro. And so now individual codes are free to make their own calls. I mean, they were, the opposition would say they were always allowed to do that anyway. So where is the issue? Where's the issue? If it was
The,
mandatory because of the pressure, you're saying the
the
gaslighting, funding, yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
was the issue.
funding. All sports rely on funding. It's a major
Mm,
issue for them, and they're all underfunded as well. And
yeah,
so, to risk your funding is just not something you do as a sport. And so, for example, New Zealand Cricket, like we contacted them years ago, and they said that they would follow their international federation's guidelines. Well, where the
yeah.
international federation changed their guidelines to protect the female category, they didn't follow suit because they said they had to follow
Ah,
Sport New Zealand's guidelines. So this is the issue. So now that those
right.
guidelines gone, our sports can actually follow their international federations. To be fair to Sport New Zealand.